People ask me why I don't sleep well. They ask me why I sit with my back to the wall in every diner, every church, every room I walk into. They ask me why my hands still shake when I hear a car backfire 3 blocks away. They ask me why, 86 years later, I still wake up at 03 hours soaked in sweat, staring at a ceiling that my mind has turned into a German sky. I always give them the same answer. I was there, I say. I was standing right next to Patton. And then I stop talking, because most people, God bless them, they don't really want to know what being there means. They want the glory. They want the flags and the parades and the newsreel version of the war. The version where everything is clean and justified and heroic, and the truth of what happened that afternoon in the spring of 1945, in a bombed-out village somewhere between the Moselle River and hell itself. That truth has lived inside me like a splinter I can never quite reach. My name is James Walker. I was 15 years old. I was a sergeant in General George S. Patton's Third Army, and I was there the day a German officer smiled. Let me tell you what happened next. You have to understand something about serving under Patton. The man moved like lightning was chasing him. While other generals were drawing maps, holding meetings, waiting for supply lines, Patton was already 50 miles ahead, screaming into a radio, demanding more fuel, more ammunition, more men. He once said that a pint of sweat saves a gallon of blood, and he meant it, every single day. We moved fast, we slept fast, we ate fast. Half the time we didn't eat at all. The Third Army had torn through France like a hot blade through cold butter. The Germans were retreating, not running, mind you, retreating. There's a difference. A running army is a broken army. A retreating army is still dangerous, still organized, still capable of turning around and putting a bullet between your eyes. I knew this better than most. I'd seen it happen to men I'd shared foxholes with. Men I'd eaten rations with, men whose photographs of their wives and mothers I'd kept in my pocket because somebody had to carry them home. By that spring, I was carrying a lot of photographs. My unit, a small reconnaissance squad of 9 men, had been attached directly to Patton's command. That meant we were always near the front, always near the general himself. It was an honor that felt, most days, like a beautiful and elaborate way to die. That particular morning, we'd been moving through the Palatinate region of Germany. The countryside was deceptive, almost peaceful. Rolling hills, old farmhouses, church steeples rising above the tree line, like fingers pointing toward a god who had clearly stopped paying attention to this part of the world. We were following intelligence reports about a small German garrison that had apparently refused orders to retreat. A holdout, a pocket of SS troops who had dug in and were threatening to disrupt our supply corridor. Patton wanted it handled. That was the word he used, handled. "Walker," he said to me that morning as he stood beside his jeep studying a map with those ice-blue eyes of his, "I want this handled before nightfall." "Yes, sir," I said. I didn't ask what handled meant. By that point in the war, I understood Patton's vocabulary completely. We reached the village at approximately 14:30 hours. It was called, and I remember this clearly because I've thought about it 10,000 times since, Viceforf, White Village. There was something almost cruel about the name, given what we found inside it. The place looked abandoned. Cobblestone streets, shuttered windows, a fountain in the center square that had been cracked by artillery fire, water still trickling out of it in a thin, apologetic stream. My squad spread out in standard formation. Kowalski and Briggs moved left, along the eastern wall of the church. Thompson and DeLuca took the right flank, covering the main street. The rest held position near the entrance while I moved forward with my scout, a quiet kid from Alabama named Reed. Reed was 20 years old. He had red hair and freckles, and he wrote poetry in a little notebook he kept inside his jacket. Terrible poetry, if I'm being honest. But he wrote it every night before he slept, like a prayer. We moved through the square carefully. Every doorway was a potential coffin. Every shadow was a question that could be answered with a bullet. And then we found them. Not the SS troops the intelligence had warned us about. What we found was different. What we found changed everything. In the basement of the old village hall, a squat stone building at the far end of the square, we found 17 civilians. Men, women, and 4 children. They were huddled together in the dark, thin and terrified, speaking in whispers that stopped the moment our flashlights hit their faces. They were Jewish. A family and a half, maybe. Survivors of something I didn't have a word for yet, though the world would soon find one. Reed looked at me. His young face was pale in the flashlight beam. "Sarge," he whispered. "What do we do?" I was about to answer when we heard the boots. His name, I would later learn, was Hauptsturmführer Klaus Reimann. He came into that basement with 3 soldiers at his back and a pistol in his hand, and for one terrible stretched second, nobody moved. My squad had their rifles up. His men had their weapons drawn, and in the middle of it all, those 17 civilians were pressing themselves into the stone wall like they were trying to become part of it. Reimann looked at me. Then he looked at my men. Then, and I have never, in my entire life, forgotten this, he smiled, not a surrender smile, not a relief smile, a cold, calculating, utterly deliberate smile, like a man who had just sat down at a poker table and liked the cards he'd been dealt. He was tall, maybe 40 years old, silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. His uniform was immaculate despite the chaos of the retreat around him. That detail alone told me everything I needed to know about who this man was. In the middle of a collapsing army, he'd taken the time to make sure his uniform was pressed. "American," he said in nearly perfect English, "I have been expecting you." "Put the weapon down," I said. He didn't. He looked at my squad, counting us. Then he looked at his own men, and something passed between them. An understanding, a signal that I couldn't read fast enough. "I have information," Reimann said calmly. "Valuable information about troop movements, supply routes. You will want to hear it." "Weapon down," I repeated. "Last time." He held the smile, and then slowly, theatrically, like a man performing for an audience, he lowered his pistol. His men followed. "You see," he said, "I am reasonable." His eyes flicked to the civilians behind me, and the smile changed, just slightly, just enough. I felt something cold move through me, not fear, something worse than fear, understanding. I don't know exactly how it happened. One of my men must have radioed back, or maybe Patton had been following our progress on the map, impatient as always, ready to push forward. But 20 minutes after we'd secured that basement and zip-tied Reimann's hands behind his back, I heard the unmistakable growl of Patton's jeep rolling into the village square. I went outside to meet him. He stood in the square, hands on his hips, pearl-handled revolvers gleaming at his sides, jaw set like concrete. He looked at the village. He looked at me. "Report, Walker," I told him. All of it. The civilians, the SS officer, the smile. Patton listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He just listened with those cold, still eyes of his, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked with me down into that basement. He looked at the 17 civilians. He looked at them for a long time, longer than I expected. His face was unreadable, but something moved behind his eyes, something private and deep. Then he turned to Reimann. Reimann looked up at him from the floor where my men had him seated. "And, God help me, I will see this until the day I die." He smiled again. Same smile, same cold, deliberate, calculating smile. Patton stared at him. The room was absolutely silent. Even the children weren't making a sound. Then Patton turned to me, and he gave the order. I have replayed this moment more times than I can count. In the years since, I have talked to priests and doctors and men who've seen as much as I've seen, and not one of them has given me an answer that fully satisfies. Because the thing about war, the thing they can never quite capture in the history books, is that it doesn't give you time to philosophize. It gives you a moment, a choice, and then it moves on and leaves you carrying the consequences forever. Patton's voice was low, almost quiet, which, if you knew the general, was the most frightening register he possessed. The loud Patton, the cursing, the shouting, the legendary rages that Patton you could prepare yourself for. The quiet Patton meant something else entirely. "Walker," he said. "Sir, get those civilians out of here, feed them, get them transport to the rear, medical if they need it." He paused. "Whatever they need." "Yes, sir." He looked at the German officer again, at that smile. "And Walker." "Sir, I want this man taken to divisional intelligence, full interrogation protocol, every piece of information he has, troop positions, command structures, supply routes. I want all of it extracted before midnight." He leaned forward slightly, just enough that only Ryman could see his face up close. His voice dropped further. "And you tell them, you make absolutely sure they understand, that this man is to receive the full and complete attention of every resource we have available, not because he's valuable, but because those people he was about to put in the ground deserve to see him answer for it." Ryman's smile finally disappeared. Patton straightened up. He looked at me one more time. "Do you understand the order, Sergeant?" "Yes, sir," I said, "completely." He nodded once, turned, walked back up those stone steps and out into the light. And I stood there in that basement, looking at the relieved, exhausted, barely believing faces of 17 people who were still alive. And I understood, for the first time, the full and terrible and necessary weight of the word handled. Reed and I helped them up the stairs one by one. A woman holding a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. An old man whose hands trembled so badly I had to hold his arm on both sides. A teenage boy with hollow eyes who looked at the sky like he couldn't quite believe it was still there. Reed was crying. He didn't make any sound, just tears running down those freckled cheeks while he helped a woman carry 2 small children up into the afternoon light. Later that night, he wrote something in his little notebook. I never asked him what. Some things a man is entitled to keep. We got them transport. A medical officer came up from the rear and looked them over. They were badly malnourished, dehydrated, frightened in a way that doesn't simply go away when the danger passes. But they were alive. Ryman was transported to divisional intelligence as ordered. I never learned the full details of what happened during that interrogation. I do know that the information extracted proved significant, that several German positions were compromised, and that the intelligence contributed to the rapid advance of the following weeks. What I know for certain is that he answered for it. I am an old man now. My knees ache. My memory skips like a bad record on some days. But that afternoon in Viceforf, that I remember with a clarity so sharp it could cut glass. I remember Ryman's smile. I remember Patton's quiet voice. I remember Reed's silent tears. I remember the little girl, maybe 5 years old, who looked up at me as I helped carry her into the sunlight. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with these enormous dark eyes. And after a moment, she reached out and touched my face with one small hand, like she was checking to see if I was real. I think about her sometimes. I wonder where she is now, whether she grew up, whether she married, had children of her own, built a life somewhere in the world that her people had nearly been erased from entirely. I hope so. God, I hope so. People still ask me why I served under Patton. I tell them, because when it mattered, underneath all the noise and the fury and the legend, the man understood what war was actually for. Not for glory, not for territory, not for the history books or the newsreels or the parades. It was for that little girl's hand on my face. It was for those 17 people walking up those stone steps into the light. That was Patton's order. The brutal, necessary human order that nobody writes about. The order to recognize that some things, some people, are worth every mile, every drop of blood, every sleepless night. I was 22 years old. I have lived every year since then inside the memory of that afternoon. And I would not trade it, not the horror of it, not the weight of it, not a single agonizing second of it, for anything in the world, because I was there, and I know what it cost, and I know what it saved. If this story touched something inside you, then do one thing for me, like this video. Because this wasn't fiction, this was real. These were real people, real orders, real blood on real ground. And stories like this deserve to be remembered. Share it. Because some stories aren't meant to just be watched. They're meant to be carried. Pass it on to someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe. Because James Walker has more to tell you. Every week I bring you the moments that history recorded, but the world forgot. The moments that weren't fought on battlefields. They were fought inside the hearts of men who had no choice but to be brave. Next time, another order, another truth, another moment that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. The war isn't over. Not for me, not as long as someone is still listening. I'm James Walker, and I'll see you in the next one.